Thursday morning here, Guttenberg, Iowa, charging up one of the bigger hills that are available here in the bluffs, and thought it'd be perfect after having run this for a couple of weeks to review the hill splitter function in the Grit X. All right, this watch is telling me that I've gone through 216 feet of ascent, which doesn't seem like nearly as much as it feels like over the past 0.45 miles. Still just a little while to go, but I'm almost there. This hill's about a half mile long. I'm at 2.85 miles into the run for today. What I see as an uphill, what I perceive as an uphill, and what in Chicago would certainly be called an uphill, but I think the hill splitter calls this flat. 14.09 miles, 8 minutes 50 seconds per mile, 139 beats per minute today. Going for a hillier route. I mean, all the routes are kind of hilly around here in Guttenberg, Iowa. I'm running in through the bluffs. But there's one route, if I run Miners Creek Road up and basically till it hits Highway 52 and come back, it's mostly dirt road, rolling uphill and then rolling downhill on the way back. So it gives me lots of chances to test out the hill splitter function on the Polar Grit X. Now, in terms of disclosures, before I get into my full detailed thoughts on the hill splitter function, I do want to disclose that the Polar Grit X is a watch that was sent to me for the purpose of review from Polar, so I didn't have to pay for it. However, they're not paying me to make this video to use the watch, and they're not going to get a chance to preview any of my thoughts or footage for you guys to get a chance to see this video on YouTube. Now, disclosures out of the way, let's talk about this hill splitter function. So what does it do? What it does is there's an altimeter, a barometric altimeter in the Polar Grit X, not exactly a new thing for higher end GPS or running activity watches. But what the hill splitter does is it in real time will detect when there are changes in grade. Basically, according to the Polar website, it says that when there's changes of grade more than 10 feet for running activities, when there's changes greater than that, it registers that as a hill. So it knows when you're running up a hill, it knows when you're running down a hill, and then it automatically creates laps for you to be able to look at later on. And so that's exactly what I'm doing here. I went on my run, there was lots of uphills, there was downhills. It wasn't like a hill workout where I went up and down the same hill multiple times. That'd be a little bit easier to kind of analyze like my performance afterwards. But instead, this run was like run up a hill, there'd be a flat, maybe a little bit of downhill, then another uphill, then another flat. And so how can I really gain insight from that? The hill splitter does that for me because I don't have to like mark, here's where the hill started, here's where it ended. It knows, it marks it all for me. It still keeps track of my regular auto laps. So for me, I have that set to miles. So every mile it tells me what my average pace was, my average heart rate, that kind of thing. It gets all figured out. But it also does a separate layer of laps where the hills are, where the flats are, where the declines are as well. And that's what I think is useful. But in terms of what you do after the run, here I'm looking at it on my iPad right now, but we can take a look at it here. And what you'll see is it's split up and there's all these dashed lines indicating where the different laps are, or the flats versus the hills. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I mentioned this a couple of times as I was filming the video, I didn't put it in like the main video itself, but it's something that I was like basically wondering out loud, and a reminder to myself to make sure I checked on this, is there's a lot of times that I've noticed in using this feature that it might feel and look visually like an incline to me, and my legs might feel an incline, but this thing will tell me it's a flat. And so I get frustrated because I'm like, I want credit for running hills. Now this particular run, the entire amount of climbing was only 689 feet of climbing. I say only, it doesn't seem like a ton. I didn't run up a mountain today, but it did feel like a lot of gain for me. Someone who normally gets about 25 to 50 feet on my entire run when I run by the lake in Chicago, 691 is a lot for me. And I want credit for every single foot. But it only counted so many uphills. And so that I find a little bit, not frustrating because it knows, but it's, I just want the validation, I guess. Isn't that what we all want? So that's one of the things that I will note. And so there's one point here, like at the 40-minute mark, where I made some comments to the camera where I was saying that it looks like that I'm going gradually downhill. Just made the turn onto 310th Street. A slight decline, just a general, very gradual decline slope getting into a flat. I think the hill splitter is still going to call that flat. I looked back at that later on in the data, and I can look at it here, and it tells me that, yeah, there was a little bit of a downhill. It's part of what the hill splitter called a large flat section, but there was quite a bit of variability in that section as well. And I can scroll down through that data and see that in that flat, there was 100 feet of climbing and 65 feet of decline that I could see down in here. And so it knows what I did in that entire flat section. But even in just that much narrower section, right at that like kind of 40-minute mark, where I was saying that I think that there's a little bit of decline before this big downhill section, I can look at that even more narrowly, which is, I love this function in Polar Flow, that it lets you look at your data like that. So let's cut it out here. And I think that, I mean, it was a real short section that I was talking about, but even in just this section, it looks like, you know, let's trim it down even a little bit further before I start getting off that hill, and that's right about there. And so that puts it at about 15 feet of downhill, which to me felt like a very nice and easy downhill. And it was 15 feet over the course of 4/10 of a mile. And so that is definitely something that the hill splitter would consider flat. I consider that a downhill. I'd love to be able to just race like that all the time, and I have done races that are like that, and it's a lot of fun. So that's something that my body notices, that the hill splitter counts as flat. Not a big deal. The area where it becomes a bigger deal in terms of being able to use this in real time is, and sometimes around here, there's very long straightaways. And your mind plays tricks on you because you have that horizon effect where the road is going up. And sometimes you might think that you're going uphill just because it looks like it's going up, but you're actually going downhill, and just that horizon effect is playing tricks on you. And the reason that's important is because you might look at your watch and feel like a little bit disappointed because you're like, oh, I feel like I have to work really hard for this pace. What's going on? If you then knew it's like, in fact, it's actually an uphill, it might make you feel a little bit better about that and help you adjust your pace. So that's where I wish that it was a little bit more real time. There are other screens in the Polar Grid X that can tell you a little bit more quickly in real time in terms of what your actual change in grade is. And that actually might be a place where a power meter is a lot more useful. Although this watch, the Grid X, can give you power from the wrist. But I do have a foot pod, which is where I get my power numbers from. But where I'm feeling uphill, it's detecting uphill, so that's working fine. But it's not calling it an uphill, it's just calling it a flat, which again is a little bit, it hurts my ego. That's the only thing it hurts. And in my kind of observations, it seems like if it's under 3% in terms of change, the hill splitter will call it flat. So flat is a misnomer, it just means less than 3% in change in grade. But it definitely notices all those changes. So one of the things that I like, and you have to go all the way to like the end over here to pick it up, is that in the hill splitter, it tells you what the average incline or decline was, which is, I think, for me, the most important fact, other than the length of the hill, is the grade of the hill. That's what's important. And the only other data fields, there's a lot of data fields here that are important to me, are the cadence and your pace, right? And so I think those are important here because normally I don't care about my cadence all that much. A lot of people ask me about it. I think cadence is a lot of times a misused figure. I don't want to say an overrated metric, but I think it's an overutilized metric, or maybe it's overrated. But I think that when you're talking about uphills and downhills, I think that the cadence is really important because we're thinking about it like a bike, right? If you're riding a bike up a hill, you would change your gears depending on if you're going uphill. You want a gear it's easier to turn your pedals faster, not as a big a gear or a smaller gear, so you can get up the hill quicker. That's the same thing that you want to do when you're running. Shorter steps, pick up your knees, keep moving those legs really, really fast. Really short steps so you can get up the hill without trying to like really lunge up the hill. That's going to create a lot of wasted energy. Conversely, on the downhills, you don't want short steps. You want big strides as long as you can handle it, depending on what the grade is. So that way you could take advantage of it, just like getting the pedals, the gear on your bike, really big gear. So that way every push of that pedal is getting the maximum amount of effort aided by gravity. So the same thing, you want that as you're running downhill as well. And so that's something else that you can look at in terms of your cadence. That's something that you can keep an eye on. My training is not so sophisticated that this is something that I look at regularly, but I do like having the data there, especially when I'm looking at these new hills, so that I can compare to, let's say there's other areas that I'm going. Let's say I'm looking at the elevation profile for a race. I can see if the hills that are around me are similar and are going to give me an adequate level of training and preparation for a race that I might have later. So seeing that grade percentage, seeing those changes in altitude in terms of where does the hill start and where does it end, that's going to be really important to me. And also seeing like what are my natural tendencies in terms of my cadence and my pace, so I could do something about it. So it's useful training information, I think, after the fact. That's how I've been using the Grit X and the hill splitter function. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other questions. If you've been using it differently, I'd love to know that as well, just to get a feel for, is there something else that I'm missing that I could be getting out of this function? So I'd love to talk to you guys more about it down there. That's all I have for this video today. Thanks so much, everybody, for making it all the way to the end. And hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs. And I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?